Hello and welcome to another Mr. Smith History. Today we're going to be looking at the witch hunts of 1645 to 1647 and we're going to be looking at in particular why people went on these hunts. So witch hunts were when people actively went out to try and discover witches, and our friend there, Matthew Hopkins, was the witch finder general, one of the main people involved in these hunts. But why were people doing it? So one reason that these hunts grew and the idea of witchcraft grew during this period was the introduction of the printing press, the printed word. The printed word meant that people like Hopkins and others could produce pamphlets and could produce propaganda that could instill the fear in society about witchcraft and encourage people to go hunting for them. Also, around this period, we've got the Civil War. The English Civil War goes from 1642 to 1651, and this is a huge period of massive unrest. The whole country is involved in this great upheaval, and there's a lot of mistrust amongst the population, and that feeds in to this idea of witchcraft and this idea of mistrust. The Civil War also feeds into the idea, fed into the problem of economic issues. There was huge problems in terms of failed harvests, failed crops, the death of livestock, and what people needed was a scapegoat. They needed people to blame, and one group of people they could blame was the witch. Our cow has died. Who do we blame? That strange old lady. She's the witch. She's cursed us. And so people would look for people to blame, and they would look for scapegoats. And there was a huge amount of social change. The war left women alone with no husbands who'd been killed in the Civil War, or even run away. And then there was lots of upheaval and people uprooted. So you've got strangers, people wandering from town to town, searching for work, searching for somewhere to live. But people didn't trust these people. People who traveled with these armies and moved from town to town would be mistrusted. And again, the idea of looking for scapegoats comes around. So who could have done this? Who could have killed our crops? Perhaps it's the strange man that turned up recently. And as you're probably aware, there was a huge amount of religious change during this period. Puritans would blame Puritans of Parliament would blame Catholics and Royalists for witchcraft, and these huge religious differences fed into this idea of witchcraft also. James I, then the king, he openly promoted the idea of witch hunting, and he encouraged people like Matthew Hopkins to stir up witches, and through their writings they would actually take part in witch hunts themselves. James I wrote a book, Demonology, which outlined his belief in witches and how they should be found and tried. James I was an incredibly superstitious man, and as I said, he openly encouraged these witch hunts. So moving on. Matthew Hopkins then was a man that was employed as the justice of the peace to find witches, and he was in Essex and Anglia, which is in the south east of the country. He received a lot of money for each person that was convicted of a witch, and his work led to around 112 people being hanged. He would torture to get confessions, and he would help stir up panic through the distribution of these pamphlets and leaflets that I mentioned at the start of the presentation. So what evidence was there? How do we know if someone's a witch? Well, they would have unusual marks on their body. There could be witnesses, people who've seen them do witchcraft. There could be tasks that they would need to go through. They could be dunked in water, and if that person floats, they are a witch. If you prick them with a needle, they don't bleed, and often people would confess to being witches. But again, a lot of this would be tied in with this idea of superstition and mistrust, and this, it's important to remember the huge upheaval that the country was going through at this time really fed in to this, to the idea of witchcraft. So that brings us to the end of this little presentation. You can catch other videos on similar topics, and certainly to do with crime and punishment, on my channel. And I thank you all for tuning in. Thank you. Bye.